The rescue ship HFS Hopebringer slowly moved through the dark silence of space. Its destination was a forgotten mining colony on the distant planet Vera 9, a place that had not answered a single message for more than 6 months. Earth had almost given up hope, believing that everyone on the colony had already died. Then, without warning, one weak emergency signal reached a nearby patrol ship. It lasted only 3 seconds before disappearing again. That tiny signal was enough for the Human Alliance to send a rescue team across the stars. Captain Ethan Walker stood quietly on the bridge as the damaged planet appeared on the large screen. From space, Vera 9 looked lifeless. Huge storms covered half of the world, while the cities below were dark without lights. No transport ships moved through the sky, and no factories were working anymore. Even the communication towers stood silent like old monuments forgotten by time. Every officer on the bridge felt the same heavy feeling in their chest. Something terrible had happened here. As the rescue shuttle landed near the colony, thick gray dust covered the ground. Broken buildings stood everywhere, their windows shattered by months of violent storms. Empty supply crates were scattered across the streets, and old vehicles remained parked exactly where their owners had left them. The only sound came from the cold wind moving through the empty city. No children laughed, no workers talked, no machines buzzed. The entire colony looked as if time itself had stopped. The human soldiers carefully walked forward with their scanners raised. Dr. Sarah Mitchell checked every building for signs of life. But the scanners showed almost nothing. The food storage centers were completely empty, and even the emergency shelters had been opened long ago. Whoever had lived here had searched every possible place for something to eat. Captain Walker looked down at the dry ground and quietly said that starvation had probably reached the colony long before help could arrive. Just as the team prepared to move deeper into the city, one of the scanners suddenly beeped. Everyone stopped. Lieutenant James pointed toward a damaged school building standing at the end of the street. The life signal was weak, almost impossible to detect, but it was real. The soldiers quickly surrounded the building while the doctors rushed toward the broken entrance. Every second mattered now because whoever was still alive might only have minutes left. Inside the building, the air smelled old and cold. Small blankets covered the floor and empty food containers were stacked neatly against one wall. Someone had tried very hard to keep this place organized despite having almost nothing left. Then the rescue team heard a soft cough coming from a nearby room. They slowly opened the door and froze in complete silence. More than 20 alien children looked back at them with frightened eyes. The children were weak and painfully thin, but they were alive. Some quickly hid behind older children while others stared at the humans without speaking. Dr. Mitchell immediately noticed something strange. Although every child looked hungry, one little girl lying quietly in the corner looked far worse than everyone else. Her breathing was slow, her face was pale, and her small body barely moved beneath the thin blanket covering her. Captain Walker walked carefully toward the girl and knelt beside her. She looked no older than 10 by human standards. Her silver hair was messy, her blue skin had lost most of its color, and her large golden eyes remained closed. Dr. Mitchell gently checked her heartbeat before looking up with great concern. She whispered that the girl was suffering from severe starvation and dehydration. If they had arrived even 1 day later, she probably would not have survived. As the medical team prepared emergency treatment, something unexpected happened. A small alien boy slowly stepped forward holding a worn cloth doll tightly against his chest. He looked at the unconscious girl with tears filling his eyes. In a quiet voice, he said something that made every human stop working for a moment. "Please save her first," he whispered. "She gave us all her food." The room became completely silent. Captain Walker looked around at the other children, expecting someone to correct the frightened boy. Instead, every child slowly nodded. One little girl hugged her knees and quietly explained that the older girl always smiled during mealtime. She told everyone she had already eaten before bringing food to the shelter. Every day she encouraged the younger children to finish every bite, saying she was never hungry anymore. Dr. Mitchell frowned with confusion. That made no sense. According to the emergency food records, every child should have received the same amount of supplies before the colony collapsed. Captain Walker immediately ordered his team to search every room inside the shelter. They carefully opened old storage boxes, checked broken cabinets, and examined every corner of the building. Then one soldier called everyone into a small storage room, hidden behind a damaged wall. Inside that room stood more than 20 small metal bowls placed neatly in a row. Each bowl had a child's name carefully written on the side. Every bowl was completely empty except one. At the very end of the line sat another bowl with the silver-haired girl's name written across it. Unlike the others, her bowl still contained dry pieces of old emergency food that had turned hard with age. It had never been touched. Captain Walker stared silently at the untouched meal. His hands slowly tightened into fists as he realized the truth. While every child believed she had already eaten, she had secretly refused every meal. Day after day, she had quietly placed her own food into the bowls of the younger children without letting anyone know. She had chosen hunger again and again, believing their lives mattered more than hers. Just then, the unconscious girl slowly opened her golden eyes. She looked at the frightened children before turning toward the human captain. A weak smile appeared on her face, even though she barely had enough strength to breathe. In a voice softer than the wind outside, she whispered only a few words. "I've been full before." Her breathing became slower. "They haven't." The medical alarm suddenly began to sound as Dr. Mitchell shouted for the emergency stretcher. The rescue team rushed to save the little girl, while Captain Walker stood frozen beside her, realizing that the greatest hero on the entire planet was not a soldier, a leader, or a scientist. She was only a hungry child. The medical shuttle lifted off from the ruined colony just as the first rays of sunlight broke through the thick gray clouds above Vera 9. Inside the emergency room, doctors worked without stopping to save the little alien girl. Machines surrounded her small bed, quietly measuring her weak heartbeat and slow breathing. Captain Ethan Walker stood outside the room, watching through the glass window. He had seen many terrible things during his years in space, but nothing had affected him like the sight of one child who had chosen to starve so that others could live. The rescued children sat together in another section of the ship, wrapped in warm blankets and holding cups of hot soup. Even after receiving food, none of them smiled. They kept looking toward the medical room where the little girl was fighting for her life. Dr. Sarah Mitchell noticed their worried faces and gently asked them a simple question. "What is her name?" The children looked at one another before the smallest boy quietly answered, "Her name is Luma." Dr. Mitchell smiled softly and thanked him. She then asked another question that no one on the rescue team could understand. Why didn't anyone stop Luma from giving away her food? The children lowered their heads. A little girl with long silver ears wiped away her tears before speaking. She explained that Luma never allowed anyone to know the truth. Every single day she laughed with them, told stories, and always claimed that she had already eaten before everyone else arrived. She looked so calm that nobody ever questioned her words. Captain Walker listened carefully as another child began to speak. The young boy remembered seeing Luma leave the shelter every morning with an empty bag. She always returned carrying small boxes of food, even after every storage building had already become empty. Everyone believed she had discovered a secret place filled with supplies. They thought she was eating during those trips. No one realized she was simply collecting forgotten crumbs and dividing them among the children before pretending they were full meals. One of the engineers reviewing the colony's records suddenly entered the room, carrying an old electronic tablet covered in dust. The device had survived the disaster because it was locked inside the colony's emergency control center. He placed it on the table and explained that it contained security footage recorded during the final weeks before the communication system failed. Captain Walker immediately ordered the files to be restored. Everyone hoped the recordings would explain what had really happened. The first video showed the colony months before the famine became serious. Families filled the streets, children played outside the school, and transport ships landed every few hours carrying fresh supplies from nearby worlds. It looked like a peaceful community where nobody expected disaster. Then the next recording appeared. Cargo ships suddenly stopped arriving. Factory workers gathered in confusion as emergency messages filled the public screens. A dangerous war had broken out across nearby star systems, cutting off every supply route leading to Vera 9. As the recordings continued, the colony slowly changed. Store shelves became empty. Food lines grew longer every day. Parents skipped meals so their children could eat. Hospitals became crowded with weak patients. Finally, the colony leaders made a difficult decision. A group of adults would leave the planet aboard the last working shuttle to search for help. They promised everyone they would return within a few weeks. The children watched their parents disappear into the sky, believing they would soon come home, but they never returned. Weeks turned into months. The emergency shelters became quieter with each passing day. Many older people grew too weak to continue. The security cameras showed children waiting every evening near the landing field, hoping to see the rescue shuttle appear on the horizon. Among them stood Luma. She never missed a single sunset. No matter how tired she looked, she always stood there watching the empty sky until darkness covered the colony once again. Dr. Mitchell could hardly continue watching. Every recording showed the same small girl helping others before helping herself. She carried water containers that were almost too heavy for her tiny body. She comforted crying children after nightmares. She cleaned the shelter while everyone slept. She even repaired broken blankets using pieces of old clothing she found inside abandoned homes. Somehow she always smiled, making everyone believe everything would be all right. Captain Walker noticed something strange in the recordings. Every evening after the younger children fell asleep, Luma quietly walked into the empty kitchen, carrying her own food bowl. Instead of eating, she carefully poured the food into several smaller containers. Then she hid them beneath loose floor panels before returning with an empty bowl. The next morning, she secretly placed those extra portions beside the sleeping children so they would think someone had found more supplies overnight. The room fell silent once again. No speeches were needed. Every human understood what those videos meant. Luma had planned every meal with incredible care, making sure the youngest children always received enough to survive one more day. She had hidden her own hunger behind gentle smiles, bedtime stories, and endless hope. Even when her body became too weak to stand properly, she refused to let anyone see her suffering. Just then, one of the rescue technicians hurried into the room holding a small metal box he had discovered beneath Luma's sleeping place inside the shelter. The box was locked, but its old electronic seal had finally been opened. Inside lay only one thin notebook with worn pages and Luma's name carefully written across the front in small handwriting. Captain Walker slowly picked it up, his hands trembling. No one in the room spoke. They all knew that whatever was written inside those pages would reveal the truth that Luma had carried alone until the very end. Captain Ethan Walker carefully carried the worn notebook into the ship's meeting room. No one rushed him. Even the busy doctors and engineers quietly gathered outside the room, waiting to hear what was written inside. The notebook looked ordinary. Its cover was faded and several corners had been repaired with old tape. Yet everyone understood that this small diary held the final memories of a little girl who had quietly carried the weight of an entire colony on her fragile shoulders. Walker slowly opened the first page. The handwriting was small and neat, written in the common galactic language. Every sentence was simple, almost like a child talking to herself. The first page did not describe fear or sadness. Instead, it listed the names of every child living in the shelter. Next to each name was a number showing how much food they needed every day. Luma had carefully measured every meal, making sure the youngest children always received a little more than the older ones. Dr. Sarah Mitchell looked closer and noticed something unusual. Beside every child's name were small notes about their health. One little boy liked warm soup because it helped his stomach. Another girl became sick if she skipped breakfast. One child could not eat certain plants because of allergies. Luma had remembered every tiny detail without making a single mistake. She had become more than an older sister. She had become the caretaker of every child in the shelter. The next pages told the story of the famine as it slowly grew worse. At first, there had been enough emergency supplies for everyone. Luma wrote that the children still laughed during meals and believed their parents would soon return. She even described how they played games after dinner to stop thinking about the empty streets outside. Reading those words made the room feel strangely warm, as if the happy memories were still alive inside the diary. Then the writing slowly changed. The food numbers became smaller every week. Some pages showed careful calculations where Luma tried dozens of different ways to stretch the remaining supplies. She crossed out one plan after another before finally deciding which child would receive each portion. She never complained about the impossible choices she had to make. Instead, she simply wrote, "Today everyone ate enough to smile. That is a good day." Captain Walker quietly turned another page. The words became shorter now, as though Luma's hands had grown weaker with each passing day. She described how the younger children cried themselves to sleep because they were hungry. Some asked when their parents would come home. Others asked why the stars had forgotten them. Luma admitted that she never knew the answers. So instead of answering, she told bedtime stories about brave explorers, kind humans, and peaceful worlds, where no child ever had to be afraid again. Dr. Mitchell felt tears forming in her eyes as Walker continued reading. One page caught everyone's attention because only a single sentence had been written across it. "If they laugh today, then I am not hungry." No one spoke. The silence inside the room became heavier than any words. Walker carefully turned another page and discovered something even more heartbreaking. Luma had created a daily chart showing every meal served inside the shelter. Every child had a small mark beside breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Every child except one. Beside her own name, every space remained empty. Day after day, week after week, there was nothing. She had recorded her own hunger as if it did not matter. One of the rescue engineers quietly asked why she would write everything down if she never expected anyone to read it. Captain Walker searched the following pages until he found the answer. Luma had written that records were important because if rescue ever arrived, the humans would know which children needed the most medical help first. She hoped her notes would save time. Even while growing weaker every day, she had been planning for a rescue she might never live to see. The diary continued with short stories about each child. She celebrated birthdays using tiny paper stars folded from old food wrappers. She invented games where children pretended to be space captains exploring new galaxies. She organized singing nights because songs made empty stomachs easier to ignore. She even wrote jokes inside the diary so she would remember to make everyone laugh the next morning. Every page showed the same simple truth. Luma refused to let hunger steal the children's hope. As Walker reached the final section of the notebook, the handwriting became shaky and uneven. Some words faded where her hand had become too weak to press the pen properly. One page described how she often felt dizzy while standing, but she promised herself never to fall in front of the younger children because they would become frightened. She wrote that leaders should smile first, even when they were scared inside. Near the end of the diary, a folded piece of paper slipped onto the table. It was an old star map of the nearby systems. Small circles marked several planets where rescue ships usually traveled. One route had been drawn with bright blue ink. Beside it, Luma had written only a few hopeful words. "If anyone is still listening, they will come from here." Captain Walker looked at the navigation officer with surprise. That blue route matched the exact path taken by the HFS Hopebringer during its rescue mission. Somehow, without working scanners or communication systems, Luma had guessed where help would eventually arrive. Every evening when she stood near the landing field, she had not been watching the sky without reason. She had been waiting in the right direction all along. Walker slowly turned to the very last page. Only half of it had been written. The final sentence suddenly stopped in the middle, as if the writer had lost the strength to continue. It read, "Tomorrow I will tell the children that rescue is still far away. Because if they know the humans are coming." The sentence ended there. No one knew what Luma had planned to write next. But every person in the room understood the truth. She had hidden even the hope of rescue, because she feared that if the children believed help was close, they would insist that she eat first, and she knew she would never let that happen. The meeting room remained silent long after Captain Ethan Walker closed Luma's diary. No one moved from their seats. The final unfinished sentence stayed in everyone's mind like a voice that refused to fade. Dr. Sarah Mitchell gently placed the notebook inside a protective case. She knew it was more than a diary now. It was proof that one small alien child had carried the hopes of an entire generation without asking for anything in return. Meanwhile, Luma remained unconscious in the medical wing. The doctors had stabilized her condition, but she was still dangerously weak. Her body had survived months without enough food, and every organ was struggling to recover. Machines quietly monitored her heartbeat while warm nutrient fluids slowly entered her veins. Dr. Mitchell warned Captain Walker that saving her would not be easy. Hunger had taken almost everything from the little girl, except her will to protect others. Unable to stop thinking about the diary, Captain Walker ordered the ship's computer to restore more security recordings from the colony. Several damaged files had finally been repaired. This time, the recordings showed the colony during its very last week before the emergency signal had been sent. Everyone gathered around the large screen, hoping to understand what had happened during those final days. The first recording showed heavy rain falling over the empty streets. Inside the shelter, the children sat together around a small heater that barely worked. Luma smiled as she told another adventure story about brave explorers crossing dangerous galaxies. The younger children laughed at every funny voice she made. Watching her, nobody would have guessed she had not eaten properly for weeks. Even while growing weaker, she made sure fear never reached the children. The next recording came from the shelter's kitchen. Only one small emergency food pack remained inside the storage cabinet. It was enough to feed a single child for one day. Luma quietly picked it up and stared at it for several seconds. Her hands trembled from exhaustion. She understood exactly what it meant. There would be no food left after today unless help arrived. She closed her eyes for a moment before carrying the packet back into the main room. The children immediately noticed the food, their tired faces filled with hope as they gathered around her. One little boy suddenly shook his head. He looked directly at Luma and quietly said that she should eat the last meal herself. Another child agreed. Soon every child in the shelter was asking her to take the food. They had begun to notice how thin she had become, even though she always tried to hide her weakness behind a smile. For the first time in the recordings, Luma looked completely surprised. She forced herself to laugh softly and gently shook her head. She told the children that she had secretly found another supply box outside the shelter earlier that morning and had already eaten before coming back. She even patted her stomach and smiled, pretending she felt completely full. The younger children looked at one another and slowly believed her once again. Captain Walker lowered his head as the recording continued. Luma carefully opened the final food packet. Instead of giving it to one child, she patiently divided every tiny piece into many equal portions. She made sure no child received more than another. The pieces became so small that they barely looked like a meal at all. Yet every child accepted the tiny share with grateful smiles because they trusted her completely. After the children finished eating, Luma quietly cleaned the empty bowls and stacked them neatly against the wall. She waited until everyone had fallen asleep before slowly standing up. She nearly collapsed after taking only a few steps. Grabbing the wall for support, she made her way into the dark kitchen. There, hidden behind an old storage box, she found a tiny piece of dry bread no larger than her hand. She stared at it for a long time. Her breathing grew heavier. For a brief moment, she reached toward the bread. Her fingers almost touched it. Months of hunger had pushed her body to its absolute limit. Every instinct inside her begged her to eat. Then, from the next room, she heard the soft cry of a very young child having a nightmare. Without hesitation, she picked up the bread and quietly walked back. The little boy was awake now, rubbing his tired eyes. Luma knelt beside him and gently placed the bread into his hands. She smiled warmly and whispered that she had found a special bedtime snack just for him. The child hugged her tightly before happily eating the small piece. Luma simply watched him with peaceful eyes. She drank a cup of water, whispered goodnight, and returned to her own blanket with an empty stomach once again. Several officers watching the recording could no longer hold back their emotions. One engineer quietly wiped tears from his face. Another soldier turned away from the screen, unable to watch any longer. They had all been trained to face war, danger, and death. None of them had ever imagined that the bravest person they would meet would be a child who fought hunger with nothing more than kindness. The final recording appeared on the screen. It was taken the very next morning. Luma struggled to stand as she walked outside the shelter alone. The strong wind nearly knocked her to the ground, but she kept moving toward the colony's old communication tower. She climbed the damaged stairs one careful step at a time until she reached the emergency transmitter. Using the last remaining battery, she activated the distress beacon one final time. The signal lasted only 3 seconds before the battery completely died. Luma looked toward the stars. A small smile appeared on her tired face. She whispered something the camera could not hear. Then she slowly turned around and walked back to the shelter, believing no one had received her message. Back in space, Captain Walker looked at the navigation officer. The officer checked the rescue records and nodded slowly. Those 3 seconds. They were the exact signal that had reached the Human Alliance. If Luma had waited even 1 more hour, the battery would have failed forever. Humanity would never have known the children were still alive, and the rescue ship would never have come. The rescue ship HFS Hopebringer left the orbit of Vera 9 and entered hyperspace, heading toward the nearest Human Alliance medical station. Every minute mattered. The doctors knew Luma's body had survived for far too long without proper food, and recovery would be much harder than simply giving her something to eat. Captain Ethan Walker watched the stars stretch into bright lines outside the bridge window. For the first time in many years, he found himself silently praying that one small child would survive. Inside the medical bay, Dr. Sarah Mitchell and her team worked around the clock. They could not give Luma a full meal because her body was too weak to handle it. Instead, they slowly fed her through special nutrient fluids designed for patients recovering from extreme starvation. Every few hours they checked her heartbeat, breathing, and blood pressure. The machines showed tiny signs of improvement. But Luma still had not opened her eyes. The rescued children stayed together in a nearby room, but none of them wanted to play or rest. Every morning they asked the same question: "Is Luma awake?" Every evening they asked it again. The answer never changed. One little boy refused to eat his breakfast until Dr. Mitchell promised that Luma would receive medicine before anyone else. Even after everything she had done for them, the children were still trying to protect her in the only way they knew. Captain Walker visited the children every day. At first, he only wanted to make sure they were comfortable, but soon he realized they carried stories about Luma that no diary could ever tell. One little girl smiled as she remembered how Luma sang soft songs whenever thunder frightened the younger children. Another boy explained that Luma had taught everyone to count the stars through the shelter window, because looking at the sky made them forget their empty stomachs for a little while. A shy child with bright green eyes quietly shared another memory. During the coldest nights, the shelter had only a few blankets left. The younger children always woke up warm because someone covered them while they slept. They believed it was magic, until one night the boy accidentally woke up and saw Luma walking from bed to bed, gently placing her own blanket over anyone who looked cold. She spent the rest of the night sitting against the wall, shivering alone until morning. Every new story made the human crew admire her even more. The engineers stopped calling her the patient and began calling her our little hero. The cooks prepared fresh meals every day, saying they wanted Luma to wake up to the smell of real food instead of medicine. Even the toughest security officers quietly visited the medical bay before starting their shifts, hoping to see some sign that she was getting stronger. 3 days later, the Hopebringer arrived at the Human Alliance medical station. As soon as the docking doors opened, a team of specialists rushed aboard with advanced medical equipment. They carefully transferred Luma onto a floating hospital bed and moved her into one of the most advanced treatment rooms in the galaxy. Doctors from several different worlds volunteered to help. They had all heard the story of the alien child who had starved herself to save others. Outside the hospital room, reporters and government officials waited for news. Captain Walker refused every interview. He believed the story was not about heroes wearing uniforms. It was about a little girl who had quietly saved 20 children without expecting anyone to notice. He wanted the world to remember her kindness, not the rescue mission. The Human Alliance respected his decision and kept the hospital under strict protection. Later that evening, Dr. Mitchell called Captain Walker into the treatment room. Luma's condition had become stable, but she still had not regained consciousness. The doctor explained that her body was healing slowly, yet sometimes the heart needed a reason to keep fighting. Walker looked at the sleeping child and wondered if she still believed the other children were hungry. He suddenly had an idea. The rescued children were carefully brought into the room. They stood silently around Luma's bed, each holding a small flower picked from the station's indoor garden. No one cried. No one shouted. One by one, they gently thanked her. The little boy with the cloth doll spoke first. He smiled through his tears and said, "Luma, we all ate today. Every one of us is full." Another girl softly added, "You don't have to worry anymore." For several long seconds, nothing happened. Then one of the heart monitors gave a slightly stronger beep. Dr. Mitchell looked at the screen with surprise. Luma's heartbeat had become steadier. Her breathing grew deeper, almost as if she could hear the voices around her. The doctors exchanged hopeful smiles but remained quiet. They did not want to interrupt the moment. The children continued talking to her. They described the warm beds, the fresh fruit, the clean clothes, and the kind humans who had promised to protect them. They laughed as they remembered her funny bedtime stories. One little boy even apologized for secretly taking an extra cookie from the hospital kitchen. The room slowly filled with gentle laughter instead of sadness. Then, very slowly, Luma's fingers moved. Dr. Mitchell stepped closer. Captain Walker held his breath. Luma's eyelids trembled before opening just a little. Her golden eyes looked around the room, confused by the bright lights. The first thing she saw was not the doctors or the machines. She saw the children. They were smiling. They looked healthy. None of them looked hungry anymore. A tiny smile appeared on Luma's face. With all the strength she could gather, she whispered only one question. "They ate?" The children nodded together. "Yes." "We're all full." A single tear rolled down Luma's cheek as she closed her eyes again, not from weakness this time, but from relief. Captain Walker quietly turned toward the hospital window, looking out at the endless stars. In that moment, he made a promise that would change humanity forever. "No child," he whispered, "will ever be forgotten again."